only mode.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Struhler. I'm president of the board of International Dyslexia Association Upper Midwest Branch. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's webinar about um, certification of teachers. A couple of small orders of business before we get our introduction of our speaker. If you haven't participated in a webinar with us before, you will not be able to speak to the speaker with audio. You're automatically in a mute mode with the webinar. If you'd like to ask a question, you can go to the question box or the chat center and text in a question, and then we will either send you back a text during the presentation or hang on to your question until the question and answer period at the end and then share it then so everybody has a chance to hear the answer. With that, I would like to go ahead and introduce our speaker for tonight. Susan Carriker has a doctor's degree, is a certified academic language therapist and qualified instructor, is the principal education content lead at Lexia Learning Systems in Concord and formerly senior vice president of innovative solutions at Newhouse Education Center in Houston, Texas. Dr. Carriker is a frequent speaker at national and international conferences and is author of numerous systematic literacy curricula, journal articles, and textbook chapters on reading and spelling. Currently, she serves on the board of the International Dyslexia Association as secretary and is coordinating IDA's new certification program for teachers of reading. So with that, I would like to introduce Susan Carriker.
Thank you very much, Tom, and I'm delighted to be here tonight to talk to you about the projects that we are doing with the Knowledge and Practice Standards of IDA. This is a collaboration of IDA along with the Center for Effective Reading Instruction. I know that we're all on this call tonight because we believe that reading is very important. It's important to academic success, economic opportunities, active civic participation, quality of life, and lifelong learning. But we know that 1 in 5 students struggles to learn to read. And year after year, we look at the national report card and it doesn't really seem to change much. It seems that 1/3 of the students in 4th and 8th grade are proficient, 2/3 are not. And the question is, how do we move the needle from here to here? And we know that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. Einstein also said that the significant problems we have cannot be solved with the same level of thinking we were using when we created them. Now, no one on this call tonight created the problems we have with reading, but we know that we have to do something different to make a difference. We could just do nothing and hope that something magical will just happen. And it feels like we've tried that before and nothing magical happens. And if you'll look at the writing on the wall, you'll see that as reading goes down, academics go down. So waiting for something magical to happen just isn't probably a good idea. Instead, IDA wants to be part of the solution. We want to figure out how we can make sure that all children are learning to read well. IDA does believe that all individuals have the right to achieve their potential, that learning abilities can be strengthened, and we have to remove any barriers to language acquisition, and we need to make sure that all children learn to read. We are promoting the idea of structured literacy. This is instruction that emphasizes the structure of language. So we want students to understand the phonology, the orthography, the syntax, the morphology, and the semantics of language. We also want them to understand the organization of spoken and written discourse. Our end goal is deep reading and effective written communication. We
Suzanne,
also, yes,
this is Brian. We're having a few people saying that they can't hear you as well. Please make sure that you're in as close to your speaker or your microphone as possible.
okay. Is that better?
That's already better. Thank you.
Okay. We also want to be very aware of other cognition and behaviors that may affect literacy acquisition. In 2010, IDA wrote the IDA Knowledge and Practice Standards for Teachers of Reading, and these standards are for anyone who teaches reading. In particular, we're looking at teachers who are working with students in pre-K3 because we know those years are so important. But these standards are also for individuals who are working with students with dyslexia in either a therapy situation, an intervention situation. These are standards for literacy coaches, tutors, literacy volunteers. Anyone who is teaching reading needs to understand the standards. The standards cover everything that we know from research. As the standards were written, the writers looked at the research that tells us what students need in order to learn to read. And we translated that research into what does this research tell us about what a teacher needs to know and be able to do. We also looked at the research that tells us what students need to know when they are reading in order to learn. How does that research translate into what teachers need to know and be able to do? So there are 80 standards that cover everything that have to do with literacy. Starting with oral and written language, we know that that oral language base is so important to reading and writing, understanding the structure of the language, truly understanding dyslexia and related disorders, understanding how to look at data and assess what is difficult for the child and adjusting instruction to meet the needs of each child. And then all of the different structures of language, we know that's very important for teachers to know. And we also included a section of ethical standards. We want this idea of being a teacher of reading to be a profession, and that they understand how important it is to have the knowledge and skills and to continue to gather the knowledge that research gives us so that every child will learn to read. So the standards were written in 2010, and then the idea was what do we do with these standards? The first thing that we did was to think about accreditation of preparation programs so that teachers going into the classroom day one would be well prepared to teach all children to read. Our idea was if we have effective university programs, we will have knowledgeable and skilled teachers of reading, and we should see increased student achievement. So we have looked at 40 or so universities. These universities have curricula, syllabi, textbooks that align to the IDA standards. So it is a way with the standards for us to measure the quality of programs. But we realize that even though we're measuring the quality of the program, we really aren't measuring the effectiveness of the program. So that's where the idea of a certification exam came into play, that the standards are the metric that we can use to measure the quality of a preparation program. Certification proves that a teacher has the knowledge to teach reading well. That proof of knowledge comes by passing an exam. So by having a certification exam, we really could show the effectiveness of preparation programs. And we feel it is a way in which we can have a direct line of accountability. We have university programs that are quality programs who are going to produce teachers who are knowledgeable and skilled. The way we know that they're knowledgeable and skilled is through that exam, and we should see an increase in student achievement. But that middle piece is really important. Knowing that that teacher has the knowledge is going to help us identify effective university programs, and we should be able to see that through line to student achievement. The exam was developed over about an 18-month period. It was done according to best practices in certification exams. We contracted with Applied Measurement Professionals, and they provide certification exam services for a number of different professions. And as I say, they had us use the gold standard as we were developing this exam. We started in September of 2014, met in Kansas City, where the company is located, and we did a job task analysis. That means that we looked at each of the standards in the IDA standards, knowledge and practice standards, and we turned them into a task that a teacher should know or be able to do. When we were finished with that task list, it was turned into a survey and sent to more than 5,000 individuals. We had 1,200 respondents, and their information was analyzed. And if you were one of those 1,200 respondents, we are very grateful for your time. It was a very long survey, and to think that we had so many people respond was really a very good thing in terms of knowing that we were going to have a solid test. And it is important that this exam be educationally sound and legally defensible, and the fact that we had so many respondents was a very good thing. We looked at those results and we reviewed the data. What was interesting is that of all the tasks that were mentioned, the people who responded to the survey had to tell whether that task was important or not to reading, and to what degree was it important. There was absolute unanimous agreement that all the tasks were important to reading, and they were very important to reading. But the exam committee then looked at the results of the survey and determined how many items should be written, how many items would be written for each of the different standards. We considered the different audiences for the items in terms of teachers who were teaching different grade levels or teachers who were teaching in different settings, and decided how the test specifications would roll out. In April, 40 item writers were participated in workshops via web conferencing to learn how to write the items, so that we could measure not just that the teachers knew the information, but they knew what to do with the information. So over the course of 2 months, the items were written, and then there was a very long review of the items to make sure that they did target the standard and that they were written in a way that they would be very appropriate to the measurement of the standard. And then in late summer, we established a pass score, and now we're excited to say the exam is ready for people to take.
Suzanne, I apologize for interrupting again, but there are still a number of people having trouble hearing you. Please do everything to sit as close as possible and speak as loud as you can. Assume people are having a very difficult audio on the back end. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I will get as close as I can. This is an example of the job tasks that were turned into the survey, and it simply says that a teacher would be able to, for example, distinguish among the domains of language processing requirements associated with proficient reading and writing. So they would know all of those areas. So these were the tasks that the respondents responded to in that survey. And this was the list of tasks that we use to write the items. The items are written for 2 different forms. We have a computer-based exam, 2 forms, an A and a B, so that if someone needs to take it again, they'll take another form. It's just a good way to ensure test security. There are 100 multiple choice items on both forms, and there are 3 types of items. There are recall items. 34 of the 100 require the examinee to remember specific information, and this means that they're just familiar with terminology that is important to the teaching of reading. 48 of the items are application items, and they require the examinee to make use of the knowledge. So it's not enough just to know the knowledge, they have to apply it. So we really, with this exam, can measure if a teacher has the knowledge and knows what to do with it. Of course, the one thing you can't measure on an exam is how well they do it, but we certainly can see that they have the knowledge and they know what to do with it to teach reading well. 18 of the items are analysis items, and these require the examinee to consider data and solve a problem or make an instructional decision. So they will consider at least 3 sets of data in order to make that decision or solve a problem. So we can look at a few examples of these items. This is a recall. The study of meaning-carrying units of language is, and it's simply just recall. Do they know what morphology is? So again, we know that they have a good foundation for the teaching of reading. Application is where they take the knowledge and they're using that knowledge to show that they not only understand it, they know what to do with it. So here you see some spelling errors, and the teacher, first of all, has to determine why the student is making these errors. And then that will help the teacher know how to adjust instruction. So as we look at these errors, we see that there are letters missing, which really represent sounds that are not detected. So this looks like the student's underlying problem could be orthography, but if it's orthography, what specifically would be taught? It does seem that the student is not detecting all the sounds, so the best answer would be phonology. Not just testing whether they know phonology, but testing that they know how to identify an underlying problem that would be related to phonology. Here's another application with other spelling errors. Initially, they look like the same kind of error because as we look at the errors, there is a missing letter. This is a very different kind of error. All of the sounds are really represented. It's not that the student is having difficulty detecting all of the sounds. This is the idea that the student doesn't understand chameleon prefixes, that in legal is changed to IL, illegal, for euphony. So the teacher would have to know that there is an error, what is that error, and to know specifically what to teach. So again, we can test the knowledge and we can test that they know what to do with that knowledge. Analysis does require them to use data, and there'll be at least 3 sets of data or 3 points of data that they have to consider in order to make a decision or solve a problem. So here we have a 2nd grader whose fluency rate is 55 words per minute. So the teacher has to consider whether or not that's an appropriate rate for mid-2nd grade. The students' weekly spelling tests average 65%. So again, this is a piece of data. It seems that on average, this student is missing at least a third of the words on the spelling tests each week. And then the teacher needs to look at the student's scores on a standardized reading assessment. On this assessment, there is a mean of 50 and a standard deviation of 21.06, meaning that the teacher has to look at the data to see where the student has strengths and weaknesses. So we look at the first score. Listening comprehension looks good. It's above the mean. The other scores, however, are below. And what is going on with this student? As we look at listening comprehension, it is above the mean. Reading comprehension is below. And we see all of these other scores like word attack, word identification, and spelling are below the mean. So the teacher should determine from the data that this student does have a decoding issue. That listening comprehension tells us it's not a listening or language comprehension problem, it is a decoding problem, and that will inform the instruction for this student. So that's just the first part of the item. The second part of the item is making that decision. So we now know that there's a student who does have difficulty with decoding. So the student is reading aloud and misreads the word steep as step. To meet the instructional needs of this student, the teacher should do what? Look at the pictures on the page to help the student cue the correct pronunciation of the word. We see this strategy used all the time in classrooms. The picture will help today, but it won't help tomorrow. It won't help on another page. So A is not going to get to the underlying difficulty that this student is demonstrating. B, reread the sentence that contains the word repeatedly to improve fluency. Yes, the student needs to improve fluency, but that's not going to help the student read words like steep in the future. Listen to the teacher dictate the word, say the word, and segment the word into sounds. Again, this does not look like a problem with phonology because the student has pronounced a word that has the correct number of sounds. D is going to be the best answer, that the teacher should have the student identify the syllable type, determine the vowel sound, and then read the word. So as students are taking this test, they really are having to think about why students make the errors they make and what is it they need to know in order to not make the same errors. So that's the exam. In addition to IDA's creation of the standards and the exam, IDA has created the Center for Effective Reading Instruction. This center will take ownership of the exam so that every year at least 10% of the items are changed in accordance with research. And the center will also make changes to the standards as appropriate to match any research that is new in terms of what we know about teaching reading. The center is established to further evidence-based approaches to reading and learning. We want to help all children acquire high levels of literacy, and the center will be in charge of certifying teachers in the general education classroom and interventionists who may be delivering services in the school. The literacy coach, perhaps, could be the literacy leader on campus, or it could be the general education teacher. The idea is that the center will work toward the initiatives that are in general education, because we know if we have good instruction in the general classroom, we can resolve or ameliorate a lot of the problems that students may have with reading. The center will be in charge of accrediting university pre-service programs. So these are the programs that are preparing teachers to go into the classrooms to teach reading. As I mentioned, they will administer and maintain the certification exam. They'll certify individuals who are in the general classroom. They are developing training modules that will prepare people to take the exam and to teach reading well in the regular classroom. There will also be a virtual directory of certified individuals. We're hoping that this certification will help administrators make good hiring decisions when they're hiring teachers for those early grades. They can use the virtual directory to confirm that an individual is certified. And then the center will showcase exemplary schools and districts that invest in highly knowledgeable and skilled teachers of reading. The modules that I mentioned are being created in partnership with Reading Rockets. There will be 16 modules, and this would prepare an individual to take the exam. They will be available on the CERI website. CERI is the acronym for the Center of Effective Reading Instruction. The site is effectivereading.org, and that will give you information about the certification, and the modules will live there. They're in preparation and should be on that site soon. The idea of the certification is to match RTI, or multi-tiered structured instruction. We want to make sure that we can give students what they need when they need it. As we think about an RTI model, Tier 1 is the general education classroom where the teacher is prepared to teach reading well. With that good instruction, there are just a few students that might need a little more help, and that's what happens in Tier 2. A little more instruction with smaller groups of students may resolve a lot of issues. Once a student has had that opportunity in the regular classroom, Tier 2, if there are still any difficulties, then it's time to move to Tier 3, which would be with that person who has deep knowledge about teaching students with reading problems. As we look at these certifications, Tier 1 and Tier 2 will be housed in the Center for Effective Reading Instruction. Tier 1 is that idea of the certified structured literacy teacher in the classroom. We know from research that a first grader who is not reading well in first grade has an 88% chance of being a poor reader at the end of third grade without effective instruction. The idea of having Tier 1 certified teachers is to prevent students from that failure. We want to catch them early so that they don't ever have to fail. The idea of the Tier 2 certified interventionist is that additional help that they can get, either by the classroom teacher who has had an additional practicum that will help him or her look at the errors that students are making and adjust instruction accordingly. For both Tier 1 and Tier 2, the exam is a requirement. Tier 1, it is only the exam at this time. We want to get the idea of knowledgeable teachers teaching reading in the general classroom, moving across the country. We want to make sure that we don't put up barriers. We want them to learn about effective reading instruction that we're calling structured literacy. Tier 2 requires passage of the exam and a practicum. And CERI is working to provide different opportunities for teachers who are interested in Tier 2 to engage in the practicum that would certify them at Tier 2. Tier 3 is going to be housed in IDA. IDA will certify those individuals who are going to be dyslexia practitioners or therapists. There are some differences in the requirements, but one requirement will be successful completion of the IDA exam. Then also a practicum to show that they not only have the knowledge, but they know what to do with that knowledge. So together, there is going to be a nice leveled certification program between the Center for Effective Reading Instruction and IDA, so that we can make sure that we help children learn to read well, no matter where they are. And I think this certification fits in so nicely with IDA's Destiny Paths. Stakeholders realize their full potential and advance our destiny. If we give students the right instruction, we adjust instruction to meet their needs, they will realize their full potential. But it takes knowledgeable and skilled teachers of reading to do that. Everyone will know about IDA, dyslexia, and the scope of our challenge. Again, I think the more we do to promote this certification, people will know about the scope of the challenge in teaching children to read. I want to tell you a little bit about a school district that is moving towards certification of all teachers in their district. This is a district of 37,000 students, and you can see the demographics of the students. 55% are low income. In 2014, the district leaders looked at the reading results and found that 40% of all the students in all grades were not reading on grade level. And they found that 80% of the students in K2 required some sort of intervention. The school leader said, we need to change these statistics. So they created Every Child 2020, a 5-year plan to make sure that every child in the district is reading on grade level. The district is now involved in professional development, and the professional development is going to complement what the district does for their literacy, but it is geared to make sure that all students learn to read well. The professional development for year 1 is being given to the principals and to the literacy leaders on campus, coaches and learning specialists. They are going to be the first to learn about reading and all of the important things we know about reading aligned with the IDA standards, and they will be taking the exam in June. The goal for the district is that 80% of the principals and the specialists will pass the Tier 1 exam. That was a really amazing decision by the leadership. They knew that the principal has to understand reading, has to understand what instruction looks like for there to be a change in the results and the achievement in reading. And that the literacy specialists who are supporting the teachers have to understand reading and how to adjust instruction to the needs of the students. Their idea is a multi-year rollout where year 1, which is this year, they're working with professional development specialists in Houston, and they are training all of the specialists in the district and the principals. In year 2, the teachers will begin to receive the same professional development. The specialists and the principals will be part of that training side by side with the group that is providing the professional development. And then the 3rd year, the specialists and principals will be giving the professional development with guidance from the organization that is providing the original professional development. But what this means is they're creating this sustainable model. They're now in that initial PD. In June, they will take the exam. They'll be certified as Tier 1. As they begin to share the instruction with the professional development organization and the teachers, they'll move into Tier 2, and they'll be certified in Tier 2 at the end of the second year. And eventually they will be able to provide that initial professional development for any new teachers. So they have this sustainable cycle of training so that every teacher in that district will get the information they need about teaching reading well. So this district will be the first in the country to have Tier 1 and Tier 2 certified principals and specialists, and they'll work toward making sure that every teacher in that district is Tier 1 certified. And we'll have an opportunity to really study teacher knowledge and student achievement. And we know that the two are correlated. But this is the possibility that this exam and certification effort can bring us. Also part of IDA's Destiny Pathways, IDA will be the go-to organization internationally. I mentioned earlier that there will be a virtual directory. So for IDA, on IDA's website, there'll be a virtual directory that will give the name, location, the educational credentials of this person, their level of certification, which should be Tier 3, their training center, and their contact information. So on the website, a parent can find someone and know that they have the knowledge and skills to teach their child well. They don't have to talk to someone. There's an immediate answer right there for them to find someone who can help them. And they'll know that they are appropriately credentialed with that Level 3 certification. SARI on its website will maintain a virtual directory, and this is more for just verification purposes. So an administrator would be able to verify that a teacher is indeed certified at a Level 1, Tier 1, or Tier 2. So again, we provide opportunities for stakeholders to go to IDA or SARI and get information that they need. And the idea of the pathway that will advance our brand with unprecedented impact and speed. When we have this certification, we can help all students learn to read. And we'll articulate with impatience and clarity that reading is a civil right. And if we think back at that direct line of accountability, this is how we can make colleges of education accountable for preparing teachers well. We will be able to find those universities that do prepare teachers well because their teachers pass the exam, and we will see high student achievement. We will be able to identify those universities that aren't doing the job we hope that they will do because their teachers won't be passing this exam and we won't see that student achievement. We can really hold universities accountable for teacher preparation if we have this certification program. And we'll generate funds to assure the resources are available. That the certification will help provide additional revenue streams. The fees for the certification exam will be used to go back into the constant review of the exam and updating of the exam, but there will be a revenue stream that is produced through this certification program. It's all a very exciting possibility. I'm reminded of Roberto Clemente when he said, anytime you have the opportunity to make a difference in the world and you don't do it, you're wasting your time on earth. IDA, I know all of you work so hard. IDA works so hard to make sure that all children are learning to read. this exam, the certification program are going to give us tremendous opportunities to help many, many students learn to read well and reach their potential. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Suzanne, one of the questions from our participants was about they live in Canada, and is there some availability for the exam for folks that live in Canada?
At this time, I believe they would have to take the exam in the United States, but that is something as we look at the next steps with AMP that we can include as part of the review and updating of the exam.
Thank you. Another question. How is the IDA certification different from, say, like an MSLIC certification?
They will be equal. IDA honors the certifications that come from the Alliance, and we will work with them in terms of the accreditation and certification. So they will be equivalent certifications.
I understand there may be some grandfathering available to those who've been certified by some other body. Is that true?
That is true. There will be grandfathering that should happen soon.
What are the current practicum requirements for a Tier 2 teacher?
Tier 2 is a minimum of 50 hours, and the idea is to help the individual or the school or the district, whoever is sponsoring the Tier 2, to look at what would be most helpful for that setting. In general, it will be to help teachers look at data very carefully to adjust instruction as well as possible. So that would be data that come from standardized tests, informal tests, or just looking at the spelling test, so that they're really taking as much information as they can to figure out what the difficulty is for a student and adjusting instruction. So it will look a little different depending on the needs of the individual or the school or the district, but a minimum of 50 hours. And there will be requirements for individuals who are able to provide the practica.
How does the exam compare to Massachusetts, Connecticut, Wisconsin, and North Carolina foundations of reading assessments?
The exam will focus primarily on reading in terms of how to look at the underpinnings of reading, and I think it will have items that are very specific to the specific needs that students may have, and be not quite as broad-based as some of those other exams, but really focused on the teaching of reading.
One of our participants has been certified by Alexercise and is interested in seeing if there is some way of being cross certified with IDA.
Yes, there will be that opportunity for individuals who have had training that may or may not have culminated in certification. There'll be a committee that will review all the coursework, look at any deficiencies that might exist, and ask that they be brought up to speed, but there will be a committee that will look at individuals who have had training and will aid individuals in getting certification.
Where can participants learn more about um, the online training opportunities for teachers?
The online training will be on the CIRI website, and that's effectivereading.org. And they will be up very soon. And they are, as I mentioned, being developed in collaboration with Reading Rockets. So they have modules and they have practice materials, and they will be available at no cost. So the best thing is probably just to keep checking the website, and they'll be up soon.
Who oversees the Tier 2 practicum so to make sure that proficiencies are being met?
There will be a committee in CIRI that will set the practicum requirements, and as I mentioned, will vet individuals who are providing those practicum, and there will be measures that, for example, a standard observation sheet in terms of looking at different things. There may be requirements for videos. So there will be, coming from CIRI, the requirements for the individuals who are overseeing the practicum, and then what those individuals should be accomplishing to be certified.
Do you have any suggestions about how to explain the Tier 1 certification to a principal or school system still teaching reading with balanced literacy?
You know, it's interesting that many of the principals and administrators that I've talked to are really interested in knowing, regardless of what the philosophy of reading is, knowing that the teachers that they hire have the information that is necessary to teach reading well. And they're excited about having the ability to make a hire that is informed, and excited that they have a measure of competency before they make that hire. So I haven't yet run across anyone who is really negative about it, because it's really just this idea of the knowledgeable and skilled teacher of reading who can understand what needs to be taught for reading, and then adjust it for students that don't understand.
Suzanne, can you tell us more about how somebody interested in Tier 3 certification would go through the process with IDA to do that?
Yes, this is under development and will be available soon. There will be an opportunity for people who have not been trained through an accredited program to submit all of the coursework that they've done in terms of submitting syllabi and any tests or things that they would have. That would go through a review committee and would determine whether or not all of the standards have been met. And if not met, there would be the idea that the individual would take perhaps another course and fill in that piece that they may be lacking. And then there is the requirement of the exam and a practicum. So again, if they've not had a practicum, IDA, like CERI, will have a process for people to be approved as providers of practicum, and will have requirements for the practicum.
Can you talk a little bit more about the tier 2 and 3 practicums in terms of what the requirements for the type of student you're working with and for how long?
Yes, for tier 2, it will vary depending on the needs of the individual or the school or district. And that will be really helping teachers identify a need and work toward a specific need. As we saw on the exam item, if there's a student who really isn't detecting all the sounds, is the teacher able to recognize that by looking at data and then providing the instruction that would help that student? It's not as intensive a practicum as we would find at tier 3. At tier 3, there are two different levels of practicum. One would be for the dyslexia practitioner, the other would be for the dyslexia therapist. And the requirements are really based on more, it's competency-based, competency-based, excuse me, where when the individual is providing the practicum, there is the expectation that there will be progress, that the student will make progress, and that will let them know whether or not the practicum is intensive enough. But there will be recommendations for how many students the individual should work with if they're working on a practicum, and how many different situations they should have. So if they're to work with 3 students minimum, that means at the dyslexia therapist level, they have to have 3 different teaching situations, not all 3 at once, but different teaching situations. The required number of sessions per week will be outlined. These are all minimum requirements. The number of weeks that they would work with the student will be outlined. The idea is that it's minimum based on what we know from current practices. And the caveat is that the student is making progress, that the individual who is delivering the practicum is able to provide the appropriate instruction so that the student is showing progress.
How might a teacher in a school district find students to work with when they may not have a specific dyslexia diagnosis?
Individuals often will talk to principals and let them know that they're available working on a practicum. And oftentimes that's a good resource, and once they get a few students, they'll get other students.
Suzanne,
Yes.
did you hear that? I'm sorry.
No, I did not.
Okay, is there a cost associated with a participant taking a practicum?
There is, and those costs will be determined with the individual who would be providing the practicum.
My understanding is there'll also be a list of folks across the country who are available to oversee a practicum so that people don't have to necessarily go to a specific center to get that covered for themselves.
Yes, that is true. We're hoping that the individuals who are approved to provide practicum will be able to provide them through their traveling to where the participant may be, or through web conferencing, or a combination. So we want to make sure that there is availability of practicum for people everywhere.
How does the practicum work with the exam? Can you take the exam before you take the practicum, or is there a cart before the horse, so to speak?
The horse can go first or the cart can go first. It doesn't matter. Either order.
Suzanne, there's only the one exam, correct?
Right, that is correct.
And that exam is serving for all three of the tiers.
Right. And what it says is that there is this base of knowledge. Not only do they understand the terms, but they know how to use the information. And that's really what it says, that there's this foundational knowledge. And really the idea is that what differentiates the different tiers will be the practicum, the intensity of the practicum.
I think we'll call that as our last question. If participants, if you have a question that you haven't gotten an answer to sufficiently tonight, please do email us and let us know, and we will do our very, very best to get an answer to you as swiftly as we can, or at least direct you to somebody who can get you that answer. Suzanne, I want to thank you very much for sharing with us about CERI and the certification exam. I think it was very informative. Participants, thank you very much. If stay tuned, it sounds like this is there are more to come in terms of the certification process. And stay tuned as well for some more webinars through IDA UMB. And have a good evening.
Thank you.